I think that kind of is a good transition into linebacker because as I'm looking through my exposures, I'm noticing I have very few true off ball middle linebackers on my exposure rate at all. And I think that's because I've been drafting fewer of those kinds of not dual eligible, just pure linebackers than most people have been, simply because when I kind of count up my positional exposure on a draft by draft basis, I count how many DL eligible players do I have? How many LB eligible players do I have? And how many DB eligible players do I have? So I'm counting these defensive linemen in both categories because I want to kind of make sure that I have, 11 defensive line eligible players, 11 linebacker eligible players, and, 13 to 15 defensive back eligible players. And that's generally because I will wait to draft defensive backs until significantly later in the draft. And I'm sure we'll get to talk about that when we get to that specific position. And so there are very few linebackers that I actually have high exposure to, but there's one player that I do have incredibly high exposure to. I have drafted him. So I've probably by the time you listen to this episode, I'll have completed 10 drafts. And I probably have Terrell Bernard in 9 of them, who is
Mm.
the linebacker for the Buffalo Bills. Now, those who have been listening to some of these more recent episodes should not be surprised by this. Terrell Bernard is one of my offseason breakout picks, and I'm really, really confident in his value. Now, I should probably diversify a little bit. It's probably not healthy to have an 89% plus percent rostership for some of these players, especially a volatile asset such as Terrell Bernard, who is not as safe an asset as I'm sure I would like to believe. But he is definitely the linebacker that I've been targeting as he's going in about the round 10 to 12 range, which is around the place that a lot of these rotational linebackers are getting taken, guys that are only going to see a portion of snaps or guys that might not even have a starting role at all. And I prefer his upside and floor relative to those guys significantly more. How about you? Who are some of your highest exposure linebackers?
Yeah, I like that call. I hope it works out for you because if you're right, that's a 3 down linebacker there that you're getting in the 10th round plus, and that's huge. That's an absolute monster move. But I'm a little worried with the draft and whatnot, but it's a good call. I like it. We joke about this often. I am one CJ Mosley ACL away from disaster. He's in it gotta be 70% of my draft so far. He's going in the 4th or 5th round, typically the 5th, and he's just a lock for about 10 combined tackles a game. That's a nice floor right there. Unfortunately, however you want to look at it, IDP show scoring or big three scoring tends to look at the big plays more. But I like having that floor there, and then alls I need is a couple tackles for loss or, a couple pass defense or the occasional sack or interception, and then he's got a monster game. I know I'm getting those 9, 10 tackles every single week he's on the field, and I really like that for that price, about the 5th round right there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great value. And while, yeah, he might not necessarily have as much of that big play upside, that's probably the reason why he's going where he's going. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit more when we get to the DBs, but snap volume in and of itself, especially guaranteed snap volume, is one of the most valuable things in these best ball drafts. As somebody who participated in probably too many of these last year. The thing that really bit me in the butt, especially later on in the season, was I had so many players on my bench putting up zeros, and not just because they were injured, but just because I guessed wrong on whether or not they would be, getting playing time. Like I drafted Eric Harris, who ended up being the backup safety for the Falcons. I drafted a lot of Anthony Harris, who ended up bouncing around practice squads and not getting any playing time. There was one or two other guys that I was like, oh man, like look at this probable starting safety that's, going super late in drafts. And so I took a lot of shots and it did not work out at all. I did not do well last year in IDP best ball. And so this season, I've been looking a lot more for guys that have that really, really safe production floor. Now, I say that after I draft Terrell Bernard, who very well could not play a single snap this year. But hey, old habits die hard. As far as other linebackers that I've been getting, I've just, after I get past that tier of guys that I'm confident will get a starting role, I think that tier kind of ends about the Aziz Al Shair range. Not necessarily because I think
Mhm.
he's the worst of the full time players. his ADP it just happens to be the lowest of them at the given moment, it should continue to rise. But there are a couple other guys who are kind of at that tail end of players that I expect to have really solid production. So I've been getting a lot of Divine Diablo, some of Landon Roberts. I think I've drafted him basically in every single best ball that I've been in since the Steelers signed him, because right now it's him and it's Cole Holcomb on the Steelers, and I think Landon Roberts is being really underrated as the linebacker too there. And a little bit of Kaiser White on the Cardinals, and Nakobe Dean is a guy drafted a lot earlier on, but now his price has gone up way too high. You mentioned CJ Mosley as a guy who you've been getting a ton of. Who are some other linebackers that you really like as at their value so far?
Yeah, I mean, there have been some guys that have been dropping. The prices are adjusting as you've mentioned though. Like Aziz,
Mhm.
man, that one we're doing right now. I forget what number it is, but we're in about the 15th round. I got Aziz in like round 11, and that's to my thought, and probably yours as well, a guaranteed 3 down, 100% of snaps linebacker, way at the tail end of all those guys. So anything I can find like that, absolutely. Nicholas Morrow, I think there's a
Hmm.
good shot that guy has a good role. I mean, the draft is coming, free agency is not over with yet, but the Eagles do need 2 linebackers, and Nakobe Dean's just going to be one of them. So, shots like that. But you're right though. If you're wrong on stuff like that, you're really toast. So sometimes it behooves you just to make sure you get some kind of playing time instead of, the guess that could be great if you land it or could
Yeah.
really screw you if you don't land